Eyewitnesses describe creatures so bizarre, beast with glowing green scales, strange antennae, and even suckers for feet. In this episode, we're going to investigate a 1974 account in Washington state that truly pushes the boundaries of what we know as reality, and quite possibly a disturbing cover-up that followed. You won't want to miss this episode. But folks, let's first take a detour to a more exotic location, the Basque Mountains. One summer evening in 1961, two Spanish truck drivers came face to face with what might be the strangest creature ever recorded by cryptozoologists. Both of them left their fateful encounter grateful to still be alive, but scratching their heads nonetheless. Neither man could account for what they had seen. We only know one of their names, Archimedes Sanchez. The other trucker, embarrassed to attach his reputation to what he had seen, remained anonymous. What we do know is that 29-year-old Archimedes was driving, weaving his way along a lonely, deserted road in the northern Spanish province of Vizcaya over the imposing landscape of the Basque Mountains. Now, although both of them had likely traveled this road dozens of times before, they remained alert as the darkness of the evening had deepened, keeping their eyes peeled for any sign of danger as Archimedes navigated each turn, while the hours ticked by until, at last, it was nearing 11 p.m. Their destination wasn't very far now, the small community of Puerto de Barazar. There, they would deliver their shipment, then head back home. It couldn't come soon enough. However, their trip was about to take a turn for the worse. As the headlights of the truck spilled across the road, they caught something in their beam on the opposite side. The side of it caught Archimedes off guard, and he slammed on his brakes to bring the truck to a complete stop. There, folks, caught in the bright light was something neither trucker had ever seen before, nor would they see anything like it since. Near the embankment was an animal that stood between 3 and 4 feet tall and was completely covered in shaggy, rust-colored hair. It stood on 4 legs, but was not in the typical quadruped configuration that one would expect from a mammal like a deer or a dog. Instead, each limb was long and flexible, almost prehensile, better compared to a tentacle than a leg. Now, atop this sat a bulbous head with a pair of large, round eyes that either glowed in the dark or reflected the beams of the headlights. The best way that Archimedes could later describe it was a hairy, 4-legged octopus, as absurd as that sounds. He said that the creature immediately froze the moment it lit up, and as they watched, the only movement it made was a quick effort to shield its eyes from the glare with one of its furry tentacles. The men and the hairy octopus sat staring at each other, both parties surprised to encounter one another. Now, Archimedes later estimated that he and the other trucker must have sat there for several moments, completely at a loss to explain what they were seeing. Now, finally, after enough time had passed, Archimedes' passenger offered a bizarre suggestion. They had a jackhammer in the back of the truck. He said, "Why don't you grab it and attack it?" Now, Archimedes wisely refused this suggestion. He had no desire to leave the safety of the truck. Instead, he thought that there might be a better way to force the strange intruder to move. And so he threw the transmission in reverse, pulling the truck farther away from the creature. And when he felt he had put enough distance between the vehicle and his target, Archimedes slammed on the gas, driving straight towards the hairy octopus. He then hit the brakes, preventing a collision by mere feet. Well, the beast won this game of chicken. It refused to budge. Archimedes tried this tactic several more times, and at one point, another vehicle actually passed by this strange standoff, but apparently didn't notice the out-of-place critter lurking by the roadside, as it neither stopped nor even did so much as slow down. Now, after charging the Hairy Octopus again, Archimedes realized that there was no hope of scaring it away. I mean, how do you scare away a Hairy Octopus? Now, short of stepping out of the truck and taking more direct action, that idea appealed neither to Archimedes nor his passenger. It was coming closer and closer to midnight. They had a deadline to meet. The best thing to do, they decided, was to simply continue about their business and hope that the monster remained in place as it had for the truck that had already passed without incident. This time, after backing up, Archimedes turned past the Hairy Octopus, leaving it in a cloud of dust. Now, they finished their job and returned home for the evening, shaken but unharmed. Now, when Archimedes Sanchez later shared his story with researchers, so much time had already passed that there was no hope of obtaining any physical proof of their experience. Now, in the years since its appearance, this cryptid has been given the name of Octosquatch, a name jokingly suggesting that it is a hybrid combination of an octopus and a Sasquatch. Now, it doesn't seem to have appeared again in Vizcaya, although if one digs deep enough into reports, it seems possible that another sighting might have happened elsewhere in the world. But for all intents and purposes, this seems to be the only significant sighting of the Octosquatch ever recorded. Now, if you study cryptozoology long enough, you start to notice some things. Maybe you begin to feel addicted, for lack of a better term, to the rush of reading reports. But as we read the books and watch the documentaries, some of us seem to notice another emotion creeping in. It isn't quite boredom per se, but that high that you felt hearing your first credible Bigfoot report starts to lessen more and more, and you start to crave something a little stranger, a little more exotic, if you will, something you haven't heard before, and no, not man, bear, pig. Your cravings have escalated and you want a stronger high. Well, folks, fire up your beast bongs, because today I have a dime bag's worth of top shelf bizarre cryptids that you might have never heard of before. These are the lesser known monsters that people claim to have seen, creatures that are so exceedingly rare that they only appear once, or at best only a handful of times. The things we're talking about today, well, they make Bigfoot seem as easy to find as golden retrievers at a dog park. Our first underreported cryptid goes by the amusing name of the Crazy Critter of Bald Mountain. No. We're not talking about the end of Fantasia here, folks. We're talking about Bald Mountain in Washington State. I actually need to be more specific. As it turns out, Washington has 15 peaks labeled Bald Mountain. So this particular location is one of the lower peaks, only standing around 3,600 feet near Newaukum, which I should elaborate, that's actually a lake. Now, initial reports put the location of the sighting roughly about 20 or so miles east of Chehalis, but subsequent follow-up from researchers suggests that the site was actually another 20 miles further away. A number of residents in Lewis County reported something strange in the skies over Washington on the night of November 14th, 1974. No one could quite agree on what it was beyond the fact that it seemed to be a fiery object that came down from the clouds on a collision course with Earth. Now, whether or not it was a meteor or even connected to subsequent sightings of the creature remains unclear. However, we do know that within a week of this occurrence, 3 people from the area reported run-ins with one of the strangest things they had ever seen, the Crazy Critter of Bald Mountain. Now, initial reports describe the cryptid as roughly the same size, proportions, and configuration that one would expect from a horse. However, the similarities ended there. Instead of a characteristic horse's profile, the beast bore a football-shaped head topped with a pair of antennae. Its entire body was covered in a layer of scales, and its forelegs were so flexible that they almost resembled tentacles. Instead of feet, the Crazy Critter of Bald Mountain walked around on suckers. A grocer from Seattle by the name of Ernest Smith was the first person to see the creature, and he stumbled upon the creature while deer hunting and claimed that it gave off this green iridescent light. Other witnesses compared this to a neon sign in the fog. Now, according to researchers, the second set of witnesses spotted the crazy critter of Bald Mountain after Ernest, but before the story reached local newspapers. Now, Roger Ramsbaugh of Tacoma and his wife claimed that they were traveling along State Route 7 one evening when they noticed an eerie glow from the side of the road. As they drew nearer, they saw a beast that, when later shared, agreed precisely with Ernest Smith's description, right down to the antennae on its head and the suction cups on each foot. Now, subsequent depictions of the crazy critter of Bald Mountain sometimes include a beak and ant-like eyes, though it is unclear whether or not these additions have any basis in eyewitness testimony at all. Now, as so often happens, news of these unusual sightings hit the local media. After reading about the story in the newspaper, Lewis County Sheriff William H. Wister took an interest and began his attempts to follow up with the witnesses. He wasn't able to, or more accurately, wasn't allowed to. Now, as the story goes, Sheriff Wister was actively discouraged from investigating the sightings. Now, that's odd. Sounds a little bit like the recent Miami event that actually happened. The resistance came from a swarm of individuals who descended upon Lewis County, all claiming to represent various government agencies from the United States Air Force to NASA. Despite this, none of the people from out of town wore any uniforms, nor did their clothes bear any insignias. What they did have, however, were firearms, which they displayed openly. Locals assumed that these were authorities from McChord Air Force Base, which sits only about 33 miles north. It was impossible to say. The only thing that can be said for certain, in fact, is that the story of the crazy critter of Bald Mountain died shortly thereafter. If there were any other witnesses, they either remained quiet or were silenced entirely. If there was any evidence obtained, it was confiscated. And if the creature was indeed real, it either vanished into the forest, fled to its homeworld, or as many suggested, was captured by the mysterious Men in Black-like figures that found their way to Bald Mountain. Now, from Bald Mountain and Newaukum Lake, we travel 62 miles north to the Seattle suburb of Bremerton in Kitsap County. Like so many of the Seattle metro area, it sits on the water. In fact, Bremerton is home to the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard, as well as the annex of Naval Base Kitsap. It was 1948, and in the post-war era, the town was still booming from an influx of workers seeking employment in the shipyards. Among the citizens was the Virginia Staples, who would confront the unknown in her apartment building's basement. It was September, and Virginia had just headed downstairs to where the laundry was located. Now, as she descended deeper, she once again remarked to herself on the size of the apartment building's basement. Since the neighboring structures were so large and crowded so closely together, the basements beneath were absolutely enormous. This, however, did not mean that they were in good shape. The masonry was in bad need of repair, so much so that the walls separating her building's basement from the basement of the adjoining apartment complex were pockmarked by massive holes. Some were so large, in fact, that rumors had spread, perhaps fueled by the apartment managers themselves, that somewhere beneath their feet lay a passageway that stretched from the basement all the way to the shore itself. There may have been some truth to it, as the basement was always dank and wet. Now, Virginia never dwelled on that much, and certainly it was the thing furthest from her mind as she would head down the stairs, laundry basket full of clothes in one hand, detergent in the other, yet she would have done well to have taken heed. Virginia eventually shared what happened that day with late paranormal author Mark Chorvinsky, who reprinted her encounter in an issue of Strange magazine. Virginia would say this: "There was a washer and a wash tub and a clothesline, and on this particular day I had gotten my clothes all hung up, but I kept feeling someone was staring at me or looking at me. It was such a creepy feeling. I finally turned around, looked towards the back of the basement, and froze. I was so scared I could still feel it. I couldn't move. In one of the huge holes in the basement, there stood this thing. Oh, it was horrible. I stand 5 foot tall, and this creature was as tall as I was. It had a bright orange-colored body and little spidery thin legs and antennae on its head that kept moving back and in and out. That thing started towards me. I backed out of the basement and got up to my apartment, and I packed all my things and moved. I was so scared, I moved over to Seattle to my cousins. I went to an aquarium to see if I could see anything that looked like what it was. And the only thing I could find that looked anything like it was this tiny little shrimp. But it just doesn't make sense. Did Virginia Staples really see a gigantic shrimp, an oversized crab creature, emerge from a massive hole in her Bremerton basement that day in September of 1948? Well, it's worth noting that Rob Morphy of the Cryptopia website says that Virginia was clearly emotional in the recorded phone message that she left with Mark Chorvinsky. She clearly breaks down into sobs at several points. She also appeared to be traumatized by her sighting for years afterward, her sleep filled with nightmares of the gigantic crustacean reaching out to her. What was it? An overactive imagination, a military experiment escaped from the naval base, or something else entirely? The creature that Virginia saw, sometimes called the Bremerton monstrosity, has become something of a minor cryptozoological celebrity, nicknaming it Shrimpy. The creature has been adopted as a mascot by the website Liminal Earth, which serves as a Google Maps-based catalog for documenting strange sightings throughout the world. Another lesser-known, much more recent cryptid sighting actually took place on America's west coast, although much farther to the south. In June of 2007, a witness who went by the name of Lurpa stepped forward to share a story that she had heard from several trusted friends. According to the person who shared the story, she went out bar hopping in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles, California in the fall of 2005. With her were 4 other buddies: her cousin, Nicole, Nicole's boyfriend, Brian, and 2 other men named Carl and Reggie. Now, Lurpa and Nicole called it a night early, leaving Brian, Carl, and Reggie to keep partying at an apartment near Griffith Park. In the early hours of the morning, the boys all headed out to the balcony to smoke a cigarette, and there they stood, chatting away, smoking and drinking, until they noticed an odd sound. Lurpa would write this: at around 3 in the morning, they heard what sounded like a horse coming down the street. From where the balcony is, you can only see so far up the street. The noises seemed to be coming from up the hills in toward the north. All the guys joked around about what it could be. There is a horse riding facility in Griffith Park, so they assumed perhaps a horse was loose. It sounded as if it was galloping and coming closer. Now finally, it was close enough, and they knew as soon as it rounded the corner, they would see what it was. Well, to this day, all 3 shake when describing it to me. According to them, it was a humanoid of some sort. Its legs were very long, as well as its feet, and it was taking huge strides as it made its way down the street. Its back was bent back, and its neck was very long and was bent forward. They said no human could be bent like this thing was. Its eyes were black, but it did have the whites as well. Its skin was transparent green, and it was wearing nothing but white pants and black shoes. Carl said that it looked like a dead Ziggy Stardust because the hair was bright red. Now, according to the story they later shared with Lurpa, Reggie instinctively gasped when he saw the beast. This small noise, so quiet that no human being could have heard it from such a distance, immediately drew the creature's attention, and it glared at them from the balcony, but never stopped moving along the street. It clomped past the driveway, then just as it went out of sight, the sound of the hooves against the pavement stopped. Now, this sent all three men into a panic, thinking that maybe the Griffith Park creature, as it has become known, might be scaling the side of the apartment complex. Well, they all fled inside as quickly as they could, locking the door to the balcony behind them. Now, if Lurpa is telling the truth, this is a truly frightening encounter. She notes that Carl is one of the biggest and toughest men she knows, standing 6'3", weighing 300 pounds, and he was absolutely terrified by what they saw. Now, she also claims, after hearing their story, to have separated the three witnesses into different rooms, then instructed each of them to sketch the creature. Although she never provided these sketches to the public, conveniently, she claims that all of the pictures were eerily similar. As far as what the Griffith Park creature was, your guess is as good as mine. As for the witnesses, they all had different opinions. Larpa explained this. Carl thinks it is a ghost from the 70s that perhaps was killed in the park. Brian said he is sure it was a creature. Reggie said that in the Philippines they would have called it a specter. They said that they sensed it was hunting something and that it wanted no part of them. They all agreed that it was after something, but not them. They also said that they felt like they were not supposed to have seen it. The Griffith Park creature may have only been seen once, but it did also sound a bit like a centaur, although you won't hear about them often from cryptozoologists. They're simply too strange for most researchers to address. I mean, these half-men, half-horse beasts from Greek mythology do actually seem to appear from time to time. I mean, for instance, law enforcement in Illinois received a frantic phone call one day in May of 1963. On the other end of the line was James McKinney of Centerville, who claimed that he had just seen something that wasn't supposed to exist. James swore that he had seen a half-man, half-horse, and to his credit, noted how crazy his story must have sounded to the police. But law enforcement weren't laughing at him. They had been absolutely inundated with around 50 other phone calls describing something similar in and around the community of Centerville. Although that's pretty much the start and the end of the story, it's worth noting that the usual explanations offered by skeptics, like the possibility that an animal had escaped from a circus, did little to explain the rash of reports. I mean, as there were no circuses anywhere near town at that time that the phone calls came in. Now, more detailed observations, although equally lacking in tangible proof, have come to us over the decades. Several years after the Illinois sightings, a gang of 10-year-olds swore that they saw something similar near the outskirts of Melbourne in Florida. The youth claimed that the 6-foot-tall, red-haired, horse-like creature was simply standing beside the highway. Now, although it didn't seem to threaten anyone, all the kids were so frightened that they left as quickly as they could. More detailed is the account of a centaur seen in 1966 in County Louth, Ireland. Margaret Johnson and John Farrell, her boyfriend, were traveling past Lord Dillon's estate when they spotted a strange horse in the road. As they drew nearer, they discovered it wasn't a horse at all. Margaret said it resembled this: a huge horse with a man's face and horrible bulging eyes. I could see by John's face that he saw it too. I think I screamed, but both of us were so frightened that we were paralyzed. The thing had a horse's body, but it was the face, leering and hairy and huge, which shocked. The couple was unsettled by the appearance, but luckily they continued along their way as the apparition vanished into the forest. A similar cryptid had manifested nearly 3 decades later. This time, a centaur was seen along a dark, isolated back road in Kings Lynn, England. It was 1994, and the wife of the witness, Nikki Knott, was so affected by her husband's sighting that she shared it with the ITV television show This Morning. Nikki's husband said that he was heading home through Kings Lynn when something in his field to his right caught his eye, and when he glanced in its direction, it looked just like a horse, with one exception. While classic centaurs are depicted as having human torsos affixed to a horse's body where the neck should be, Well, the King's Lynn centaur lacked arms or a midsection. It was simply put a human head on a horse's body. If that's not nightmare fuel, I don't know what is. Nikki's husband was so unnerved by the sighting that he sped the rest of the way home, not daring to stop or look in his mirrors the entire way back. He was convinced that the grotesque hybrid was going to gallop all the way home behind him. Thankfully, it did not. Now, another unconventional centaur was seen in England just 2 years later. In his book, The Inhumanoids by Barton Nunnally, Barton wrote this: a security guard stationed at the RAF Upper Heyford, Britain, allegedly saw an equine anomaly one night in 1996. He had heard the sound of hooves running in the darkness, but when the beast ran from out of the shadows, he saw that it had human feet. I could find no further description of the creature, nor an explanation as to where the sound of hooves striking the ground might have come from. Barton also shared a story from Baku, Azerbaijan. There, in December of 1989, a tall, centaur-like being was said to have been spotted jumping from rooftop to rooftop, all the while grunting and scaring people with its red, glowing eyes. It was said that some unlucky eyewitnesses were even blasted by strange beams of light emanating from the creature's body. The centaur eventually disappeared beyond the edge of town, where it was never seen again. Or was it? In 2000, the city of Queuada, located in Chile, experienced difficulties with a very similar intruder. This time, a resident stepped outside his home to investigate a ruckus coming from the roof, only to find an 8-foot-tall figure staring back down at him. When asked to describe it, the man said that it resembled a centaur with one disturbing change: it lacked a nose. The witness then watched helplessly as the creature bounded from roof to roof, just as the creature had behaved in Azerbaijan. When it reached the last home in the neighborhood, it vaulted from the top and landed on the ground, boom, where it disappeared into a nearby ravine. Although no human beings were hurt, it was said that a pet dog was discovered the following day in the same general vicinity. Whenever cryptids are seen often, it seems reasonable to assume that we are dealing with something real, in the flesh and blood sense. I mean, few, if any, contemporary cryptozoologists believe that Bigfoot is just one animal, or Nessie is just one aquatic creature dwelling within Loch Ness. They must be surviving populations of creatures, they reason. But when cryptids are spotted just a few times or only once, like the Hairy Octopus, or the giant shrimp, or the crazy critter of Bald Mountain, it forces us to answer a question, if not for the rest of the world, then at least for ourselves. Are these cases describing truly rare cryptids or simple misidentifications? Or is there some truth to these tales? If the witnesses are to be believed, are they running into these sole specimens of undiscovered species, or creatures visiting us from realms we dare not conceive, from our dreams, from our imaginations, or from other dimensions? And because you guys have made it this far into the video, I think Centaur sticks out to me. I want you to all comment down below, stop horsing around, so I know who made it to the end of the video, and well, who didn't. If you guys enjoyed today's content and want to see more videos just like it, go ahead and smack that like button and the subscribe button down below to see more of this, well, more often. As always, I love you all, keep an open mind, and I'll see you guys in the very next video.